Welcome to the Deep Dive. We love getting your requests, and today we've got one that's a total blast from the past. It's all about words and phrases from the 1950s.
Yeah, it's super cool. A listener sent us some excerpts from an English learning podcast that dives into how Americans spoke back then, like a little time capsule of language.
Totally. And what's wild is that some of these phrases, even though they sound super retro, you can still hear them today. So in this deep dive, we're going to dissect these linguistic gems, figure out where they came from, and maybe even crack the code on why some stuck around while others faded away.
Right on. So the learning podcast starts by giving us a sneak peek at some key vocabulary we're going to encounter in a dialogue. And the first one they hit us with is sock hop.
Sock hop, okay?
Yeah.
Like, I know what a sock hop is, but to break it down, the material explains that it was this hugely popular type of school dance in the 50s. Imagine teenagers in a gym, grooving to rock and roll, and get this, they'd often ditch their shoes and dance in their socks, supposedly to protect the gym floor. Can you imagine that now?
It's so interesting to think about how different things were back then. Like the sock hop wasn't just a dance, it was this whole cultural phenomenon. The rise of teenagers as like a distinct group, the birth of rock and roll music. These dances were their scene. And even though the sock hop itself isn't really a thing anymore, the image has stayed with us thanks to movies and TV shows.
Totally. And the second vocabulary word they previewed is Sadie Hawkins dance. Now, this one still rings a bell, right?
It does. The learning material explains that a Sadie Hawkins dance is one where the girls do the asking. They get to choose their dates, turning the tables on the whole traditional prom thing. And it's interesting because while the name Sadie Hawkins might not be as widely recognized as it once was, the concept of a girl's choice dance is definitely still alive and well, at least in North America.
Yeah, that's so cool how these social ideas kind of get embedded in language. Okay, so after that little vocabulary warm-up, the Learning Podcast takes us to a high school, right? Can you set the scene for us? What's the dialogue about?
Sure. The dialogue revolves around a guy named Sandy who wants to ask a girl named Tracy to the big dance. But there's a twist. It's a Sadie Hawkins dance, so Tracy playfully reminds him that he's supposed to wait for her to ask him. And then, because no high school drama is complete without a love triangle, another character, Tommy, shows up and becomes clear that he's also got his eye on Tracy.
Classic high school stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so the dialogue is where the real language deep dives begins. What's the first word or phrase they zoom in on?
The first one is heya.
Hey, it definitely has that old-timey vibe, doesn't it?
Yeah, the source material describes it as like a vintage, informal greeting, basically another way to say hi or hey you, kind of like a friendly shout out.
Hey, it does sound sort of lighthearted and maybe a little musical, right?
Mhm.
The Learning Podcast points out that you still might hear it today, but it definitely has that retro feel. I wonder why some old greetings stick around longer than others, like why hey, and not, say, some other outdated hello.
It's an interesting question. Maybe heya has survived because it's so simple and straightforward. Plus, it's informal without being too slangy. And that little bit of playfulness you mentioned, maybe that helps it make a comeback every now and
It
then.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, what's the next linguistic gem we're going to dig into?
Next up is swell.
Swell.
It comes up when Tracy is asked how she's doing, and she replies, I'm swell.
I'm swell. I love that.
The podcast explains that swell basically meant great or good back in the 50s.
It's funny how some old words just have this charm to them,
Yeah.
like swell. You still hear it every so often. Why do you think certain words get preserved like that, with this nostalgic feeling attached to them, while others, poof, they're gone?
That's a really great question that gets at the heart of language evolution. It's this idea of archaism. Words like swell become markers of a specific era. So when you hear them, you can't help but think back to that time. And maybe it's because we encounter them in old movies or books, or maybe it's just that the word itself has a certain pleasing sound or meaning. Whatever the reason, it manages to hang on, even if it's not part of our everyday speech.
It's like those vintage clothes that come back in style.
Yeah.
Okay, so things start to get a little heated in the dialogue, and the next phrase is, cool it.
Exactly. As the drama unfolds, one of the characters tells the others, cool it, guys. And the learning resource explains that this basically means relax or take it easy. It's like a signal to calm down or stop a fight from brewing.
Cool it. That one has definitely stood the test of time. I feel like I hear it all the time. Why do you think certain slang terms like cool it are so durable, while others from the same era just vanish?
Cool it has this amazing clarity and conciseness. It just cuts through the noise and gets straight to the point. And it speaks to this universal human need to, like, de-escalate tension. And unlike slang that's really specific to a certain subculture or trend, cool it is something everyone can relate to.
It's like the linguistic equivalent of a fire extinguisher. All right, well, the tension definitely doesn't cool down because the next phrase is knuckle sandwich.
Oh, yeah. The source material was very clear that knuckle sandwich is not a polite offer of lunch. It's slang for a punch. The idea being that your knuckles are the bread of the sandwich and the other person's face is the, well, you get the picture.
Ouch. Not the kind of sandwich you want to be offered. It's a really vivid, almost cartoonish way to threaten someone. Do people still actually say knuckle sandwich? I don't think I've heard it
I
recently.
think knuckle sandwich has mostly faded from everyday use, but the idea behind it, that blunt in-your-face threat, hasn't gone away. We just express it in different ways now. Maybe its vividness is what makes it stick around in our minds, even if it's not something we actively use.
Right. You definitely get the message. And last but not least, we've got pipsqueak. What's the deal with that one?
Pipsqueak is an old-fashioned insult used to put someone down for being small and weak.
Pipsqueak. It almost sounds cute, doesn't it?
Right. And the Learning Podcast mentioned that you might still hear it today, but mostly in a humorous way.
It definitely has this old-timey cartoon villain vibe to it. I wonder if that's why it's stuck around. It's almost like it's become so over the top that it's lost its sting.
That's a really interesting thought. Maybe that distance from its original harshness allows it to be used for playful teasing rather than genuine insult.
So we've broken down all the individual words and phrases from that high school drama. Now, the Learning Podcast shifted gears a bit to focus on what they called fluency builder phrases. It's all about seeing how those words function in longer expressions. And the first one they highlighted was, "It'll be a blast."
Yeah, when Sandy is trying to convince Tracy to go to the sock hop with him, he says, "It'll be a blast." And the podcast explains that, well, a blast basically means something that's really fun and enjoyable.
The blast. That's one of those phrases that never gets old, right?
Huh.
That party was a blast. I wonder why these positive expressions seem to have such staying power.
It probably comes down to the fact that wanting to express how much we enjoyed something is a universal, timeless human thing. So finding those simple, effective ways to do that, they just tend to stick around.
Okay. What was the next phrase on their fluency builder list?
The next one was, "Have my eye on you." It comes up when Tracy is teasing Sandy, saying, "When are you going to ask me to the dance? I've had my eye on you for a while now." And the podcast explains that this means to watch someone closely because you're interested in them romantically. They drew an interesting analogy to wanting to buy something and keeping an eye on it so you don't miss out. Do you think there's another analogy that could capture the feeling behind that phrase?
Have my eye on you. Maybe like a detective who's zeroed in on a particular suspect they're really interested in. The buying something analogy makes sense in terms of wanting something, but the detective thing brings in that element of close observation.
That's a really insightful parallel. You're right. It emphasizes that focused attention and sustained interest. And while it's often used romantically, like in the dialogue, it can apply to any situation where someone is being closely watched.
Very true. And the last fluency builder phrase was ease off.
Yep. Tommy uses this one when he tells Sandy, in a very possessive way, to ease off, my girl.
Ease off.
The podcast clarified that ease off basically means to back off, relax, or stop putting pressure on someone. And they even gave examples of easing off stress or easing off junk food. It's a really versatile phrase.
Totally. Ease off.
Yeah.
Like if someone's being a real pain, you might tell them to ease off, right? I feel like it's something you can use in a ton of different situations.
It definitely is. It works anytime you want someone to dial it down a notch, whether it's their behavior, their expectations, even their habits. The examples they gave in the podcast really highlighted that.
Okay, so we've explored all those words and phrases in detail, and the podcast suggests going back and listening to the slowed-down version of the dialogue again. Do you think having this deeper understanding of the language changes how you experience that conversation?
Oh, absolutely. When you understand not just the dictionary definitions, but also the nuances, like that nostalgic feel of swell or the implied threat in knuckle sandwich, you start to get a much richer sense of the characters and what's really going on between them. It's like going from watching a movie with subtitles to understanding every word. You connect with it on a whole other level.
Totally. It goes from just words to actual feelings
Right.
and a whole cultural backdrop.
Yeah.
Which, speaking of cultural context, the podcast mentioned that the 1950s was a really specific time in American history, and that this is just the first in a mini-series they're doing on language from different decades. Why is it so fascinating to look at these phrases from the past? What can they tell us about the time period?
Language and culture are totally intertwined, you know? The words and phrases that become popular in a certain era are like a reflection of what people valued, how they behaved, even what they did for fun. Like, think about the sock hop. It tells us a lot about teenagers in the 50s, their music, and how they socialized. So, by understanding these snapshots of language, we get this incredible glimpse into past eras. It helps us understand old movies and books, and even connect with people who lived through those times.
It's like these phrases are little keys that unlock the past. Okay, the source also mentioned an English Pod audio review section. What was that all about?
Oh, that section in the podcast was basically designed to reinforce what we just learned. It would provide definitions and maybe some more examples of how to use the key words and phrases we talked about. It's a classic language learning technique.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are the biggest takeaways?
I think the biggest takeaway is that language is constantly changing, but it also holds on to pieces of the past. It's like a living, breathing thing. And what's so cool is that a lot of these seemingly old-fashioned words and phrases are still understandable today, and some are even still in use. It gives us this tangible connection to the 1950s and how people spoke back then.
It's like a little linguistic time travel adventure.
Exactly. And for you, dear listener, we hope this deep dive has given you a fun and insightful journey through the language of the 1950s.
Without making you feel like you need to dust off your poodle skirt.
And to leave you with a thought. What other words or phrases have you come across that sound a bit dated? What do those words tell you about the time they were popular? How does the way we speak reflect the changes happening in our world? It's something to think about. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
See ya.
Catch you later.